get the recording going again.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. So I just want to make sure that this is the right view. Okay, terrific. Okay, so this is where we got the side by side. Okay, so John and Jessica Hannigan, great to be talking again, Jessica. This is our second time talking, and John, we got a brief introduction. And you know, it's great to be able to spend some time together and talk about the challenges in education, especially under the current circumstances. Really, you know, the term unprecedented is really an understatement. And it's often, you know, it becomes cliche, but this is real. This is real. This is really unprecedented. We're working with a pandemic now that's into its second school year, and it's wreaking havoc literally across the world. And you know, you guys just put out another book, SEL From a Distance. And if there was ever a time that we needed SEL, I mean, you talk about the social and emotional impact of the quarantine, of the lockdown, of the pandemic. And for teachers to be able to address that from a distance is so critical. So let's start there. I know you've written a number of books now. You guys are seasoned authors already. So let's talk a little bit about SEL From a Distance, because I can't imagine that you started writing it when the pandemic hit. You must have been, you know, you must have had this in the works from beforehand, right? This doesn't, you know, churn out that easily. So let's hear a little bit of the backstory of SEL From a Distance and how you guys got into that.
We're chuckling because it really truly was a passion project and a call to action. There was a lot of the processes and tools in the works with the other work we were already doing, but very quickly we had to adjust and adapt to meet the needs of our schools and our colleagues. And so, to be quite honest, it was the quickest and hardest thing to write because we had such an urgency for it inside to make sure that we had it in the hands of our educators to help our students.
So you're telling me that you actually did not start this project until the pandemic hit?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, a lot of the tools that we used are, you know, the March, April, May, getting called out to schools saying, help, this is what we're seeing. We need help with this. You know, students start logging on. How can we identify, you know, some tools and resources to get them connected? And so, yeah, a lot of it was just basically a compilation of all the supports we were providing schools during this time. And so our publisher came to us and said, hey, this is the #1 request that we're seeing. How quick could you guys get this turned around? And so it took a lot of what would normally be a 9-month process, and that we just worked directly with our main editor, Jessica Allen, that it was just kind of the two, like the three of us, that she was on the back end editing as we were putting content in, and got it turned around really quickly. And so not as, like Jess said, it's a call to arms, not an effort to be opportunistic to capitalize on this moment, because it's the #1 request. And so it's, how can we get these tools in the hands of those that need them the most?
You know, when you say that it's a call to arms, it's so clear to me. I spend a lot of time talking with other educators around the world, literally, you know, through social media. And you can tell that some of them are opportunistic. You know, they see an opportunity to jump in and take advantage of a certain need. But for the most part, and when you talk to these educators, you can spot it, right? You can hear it in their voice. You know, they are just so steeped in this and so passionate about it. And it really is a call to arms. So, you know, and just following you guys on social media and seeing, you know, and what I mentioned to Jessica when we had that last conversation, that was the podcast episode, you know, that first post that I saw from her of, you know, you don't send a kid home and expect them to come back knowing how to read. So why are you sending kids home and expect them to come back knowing how to behave? You know, that is not that an opportunist will never, that's just not opportunistic. You know, an opportunist will never look at it that way. That's someone who, you know, deep in their core is passionate about kids that are struggling, that can't navigate their system, and we need to get them the tools, and clearly, you know, with the experience of knowing how to get them the tools. So that's amazing. So talk a little bit about that process. I mean, what's typically a 9-month process, you did it in how many months?
Weeks.
We laugh about this because it was it was a pretty hard it was a pretty hard 2 months, but every time we were frustrated, tired, exhausted, we just kept on coming back to the why. And we say 9 months, but I mean, typically we have another book that came out at the same time that has been 3 years in the works.
Wow.
With our great colleagues, Austin Buffum and Mike Mattis from Solution Tree. So this is even beyond accelerated. 9 months is typically once you have the draft going and you're doing just the final edits. It usually takes longer than that. It took about, I want to say solidly, a solid 2 months. And I'm talking, that is all we did, taking turns, being a parent, being present, but needing to get this done. And it's the most emotional book that I have ever written. And I am just so passionate about getting this in the hands of as many as possible, just because we're seeing, even with our own kids, we're seeing with our families, our friends, our kids are struggling with anxiety, depression, excessive strain, or excessive stress. And so are the adults. And so this book, actually, as you're utilizing it, whether you're an educator or parent, you're actually reflecting on your own processes and toolkit for yourself as you're going through this. And so that was very important for us. So the first couple chapters are very education nerd focused,
Right.
but then when you go into the tools and processes, it's a menu. You could literally go to, if your child's struggling with self-confidence, with self-awareness, with self-discipline, you could literally go right to that area in the book, get some tools and processes that have worked from a distance for us, and start there, but then innovate from that point.
Yeah,
That's great.
we wanted to provide something that wasn't going to be, just like a read it, put it on the shelf kind of thing. So it's literally like the first 30 pages, like Jess said, is building the why and the context for this work. And then the next 100 pages are literally just tools and resources. And so that's what we always get is that's great, but now what? This is what I'm dealing with. Yeah, all that theory and all that stuff, that's really nice. But here's what I'm facing right now. And so knowing that that our educators out there, their plates are not just full, but overflowing. They don't want another thing to do. And so what we wanted to give them was to make that connection that if this is the behavior that I'm seeing, students not turning in work consistently, good. Here's self-management as the SEL competency. Here's either a goal setting form, here's like a self-monitoring tool to get that student structured and on track, monitoring their own progress, their own metacognition, as far as like, if you didn't complete it on time, why, what impeded you, so that they can get back on track. And so they can prioritize their assignments for the week and really organize their thinking and goal setting. So, I mean, a lot of the things that sometimes we hear with social emotional learning is like some of the misconceptions are deep breathing or mindfulness and things that are a piece of it. But,
Right.
Sometimes that turns the teacher off as seeing that it's like a 30-minute block of time on Friday, as opposed to
Right. Integrated throughout the day.
here's the need that I'm seeing with my student. That means that they're lacking a specific skill. If we use this tool, it's going to give them practice to acquire those skills so that they don't engage in these behaviors again. And so, again, wanted to provide then tools that it's, if I'm seeing this, then I can provide this, as opposed to just this complex kind of muddy, where do I even start kind of process. It's just a quick practical way.
And if I could add, really putting an intentional focus on what is mastery of that skill or area you are focusing on. So similar to how we do with academics, we need to know what mastery of that. And we really push for in the book, really looking at it as independent, is where we're trying to get our kids to independently use these skills. but then there's also with prompt, and then there's the students who are not at all mastering, and what do we need to do for them? So if we look at each area in that way and change the narrative of these kids aren't engaged, they don't care, they're not logging in on time, to what skill are we going to focus on? And then how do we change that narrative? How do we see if our students have mastered it, instead of making it so complex and making it so it's impossible to measure? Getting back to, just real life, like what will it look like if a kid does this for you? And let's start there. And that's when we start seeing the actual impact in our students and our schools, in our classrooms.
And just one last thing on that is a lot of times when we think of, again, going back to the, like, what social emotional learning is a lot of times we see it as that students struggling, impulsive, being disruptive. We see it in those kind of behaviors, but sometimes we don't connect it to those academic behaviors as well. And so I think that's what's kind of really flipped this whole pandemic, is like flipped what we were traditionally seeing in the face-to-face environment, where those disruptive behaviors, impulsive blurting out and all that stuff.
Right.
And now we're seeing a lot of those academic behaviors, students not logging in on time, punctuality, goal setting, all that
Engagement, even when they're logged in.
So I think what this pandemic has done, and I think that when we do get back to quote normal, when that day does come, that we're all going to be better from it, because we'll see the need of both of these academic and those social behaviors, and seeing them as gaps, a skill that's lacking to then fill that need to get those students where we need them.
Right. Understanding the process of how one leads to the next and how they feed into each other. It's always interesting to me. One of the things, and I may have mentioned this, in our last conversation, Jess, you start to see deviant behavior, kids dropping out and really being disruptive in middle school, because that's when they're at the age where they have the autonomy to do that. At the younger ages, they, if you yell loud enough, they'll back off. That's just the way kids are. But by that time, it's so late in the game to address these issues. And if we can catch them earlier and identify these kinds of trends, now, like you're saying, similar to now where they're not acting out in class because they're on Zoom. So it's, there are certain things that they can do that's more disruptive on Zoom, but a lot of things that are less disruptive on Zoom. So you're going to see them not logging on. You're going to see the deficiencies, the lacking in other areas. You're making that connection, and that's fantastic. But if you take a step back and you look at, let's say, a kid over the course of their entire career in school, if we can connect those dots that are, at the much earlier stages that can inform us later on, you can get a similar kind of thing. And that's something that's always curious to me. Like, we know in medicine, we go get tested at certain, we hit a certain age, we're starting to get tested for certain problems, because we know if we catch it early, we can, we could extend our lives 20, 30, 40 years, right? We recognize that we do that, and those procedures are not always so pleasant, but we know what's at stake, so we go for it. How do we figure that out in an education setting to really, lower the dropout rate, increase the graduation rate, increase the going to college rate, and especially in those communities that are hit the worst. So there's so much work that can be done there, and hearing you talk about this is just another perspective of that, another way of looking at that, which I think in the pandemic is so critical. It's so critical because everyone is scrambling. You literally see everybody scrambling. I recently did a podcast on the fact that one of the things that's most unsettling, at least, what I'm seeing, and even for myself personally, is the lack of routine, because, we're not in our regular routines, and schools don't know what they're doing, and they're delaying starting, and they're coming, and they're in, there's so much different. We're creatures of habit, and we rely so much on that to be calm, to be settled, to be able to focus our energy on the things that we need to focus our attention and energy to. And all that has been pulled out from under us. So it's really, really challenging. What do you say about that?
Well, you got me thinking about the importance of the book that, we worked on with our colleagues with regarding RTI and PLC, specifically for prevention. And that's exactly what you were just saying right now. A big part of prevention is predictability, structure, clarity, and our students thrive from that, and being really intentional of giving all of our students access to those needs. We've been telling a lot of the schools that we work with, you need both of these books right now. The behavior solutions is going to help build your structure to make sure that you're functioning as a professional learning community around behavior, and knowing, what it is that your response is going to be. Is it going to be prevention, like you said, structure, schedule, communication, predictability? Is it going to be intervention, reteaching for a group of students not responding to the prevention? Or is it going to be remediation, where, there's multi-year gaps in how this student or students are generalizing these skills? And so that's so important to build that structure. And then what we say is the SEL book is right now. It is the right now. It's tried and tested, and you could adapt based on your response, whether you're doing it whole school, whether you're doing it for a small group of students, whether you're doing for a very intensive group of students, and you're just adding those layers of supports.
That's great.
And one of my biggest compliments as an elementary school principal was from the middle school teachers that were like, we could tell where the Reagan kids are. That was the name of our school. That when they come to the middle school, it was that they had that structure since day one in transitional kindergarten or kindergarten, where, we were relentless with those students in transitional kindergarten, first grade, where sometimes it was the 1,302nd time that they started to respond, but we were diligent and kept on it, where then even in our upper grades at Reagan, our 4th and 5th grade teachers were like, so-and-so did what in first grade? No, because now that person's a peer mediator on student council or whatever, because they in the upper grades weren't seeing those behaviors, because those 5 kids took up 95% of my time, but it's an investment. It's not, it's not taking away my time. It's an investment on changing their behavior, so that when, we get them to the middle school, that they're on grade level in reading, that they're also behaving as you would expect them to. And there's a lot of schools I also support that aren't, the traditional TK through 6th or TK through 8th or whatever that system is. Sometimes it's, here's a K1 school, here's a 2-3 school. So you can now imagine, if everybody has that kind of mindset, like, oh, well, one more year and they're out of our hands, we don't have to worry about it. If everyone has that mindset of, exclusionary practices or things like that for discipline, or fear and punishment as opposed to grace and support, that they're going to go through our system as middle schoolers, as high schoolers, and then one day be part of our community. So what is it that we're trying to develop as I wouldn't even say K-12 anymore. It's TK through 14 now. We really have to support those first 2 years of college too.
And I just wanted to add to that, that is our why for our Equity and School Discipline Facebook group, is that this work is about saving lives and helping students have good, successful lives, and then ultimately building our communities from that. And so that, John hit on that perfectly, that this is bigger than just our classroom or our school. These skills are essential for our kids for life. And so even with our little John, who's going to turn 4, it's crazy to think about that. But even with John, our priority is strengthening his SEL skills, his social emotional learning skills. Starting at this age, how do you respond when you're upset? How do you ask for help? What do you do if someone's hurting your feelings? Those are just a few, so that he could start practicing and learning these skills starting from age. We've started this since he was, born, but starting at this age, so he could build that self-confidence, have that voice, and advocate for himself as he grows. So I feel like that's our number one priority, more than any academic area that we focus on with him. And I wish it could be with all students.
It definitely is. One of the things that I speak to teachers about all the time is that if you just think about the impact that you're having on these kids, in 20, 30 years from now, they're not going to remember the academic part. Reading is critical. No one's going to knock the ability to read, and doing math and science. All these subjects are really, really important. But when you think back to the great teachers that you had as a kid, it's the ones, and they maybe didn't have the language that we have today, or it didn't focus on it exactly the same way, but they built us with these skills. They gave us this foundation. And this is really, like you said, really, really supersedes any academic. You could struggle academically. You don't have to be the best. It could take you a little bit longer to read, or to whatever it is that you might not know all the planets in the solar system or whatever. All of that is fine. Or when the Civil War was, whatever it is, it's all good. But if you can, navigate society, that's really where it's at. And to have the language and to be able to make it front and center. And like you said, to really, parents should be doing this with their kids from day one. And kids watch, and they see how parents react, and we really are doing it by example to a very large extent as well. But having, like you had mentioned, doing it intentionally and focusing on it and having the language for it is super, super important. So, I love what you guys are doing, and the passion is obviously, I can feel it across, you guys are on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. I can, it comes across loud and clear. So that's great. And, it's great stuff. Just keep doing that great work. Now, on the other end of it, I've been working on this app, ClasStars, for many years already, but it was a very similar kind of call to action, because I was working with teachers and with parents, and there was a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding, and asking teachers to keep track, to keep behavior charts and frequency of misbehaviors, and giving positive feedback to every kid, and just making sure that the kids were actually in class from the beginning till the end of the day. All these things were going unnoticed. And I would work with kids. I actually coined the term invisible progress. Kids who would actually make progress, but it would go completely unnoticed by teachers, by administrators, because it wasn't being documented. And the way I would describe it to parents is like, when you're on the phone and your kid is nagging you, and you say, stop, I'm on the phone, right? And then one time they don't nag you, you don't notice that, because your focus is on the phone call. But really, it's important to compliment them afterwards and tell them, I appreciate that you didn't interrupt my phone call, like I'm always asking you to wait until I'm off the phone. If you give them that positive feedback, they'll be able to turn around with it. So I had this idea that the real way to, the best way to kind of guide, people's attention is through software. I remember sitting one day on a train, New York City subway, watching somebody play Subway Surfer, with their finger, going back and forth between the different obstacles, right? Everybody knows that game. And I was thinking there's such precision in that, because if you're off by like a microsecond, you're out. And obviously as the game goes on, you need to be even more precise because it speeds up. And there's got to be a way to help teachers, like you had mentioned beforehand, John, like there's some kids that take most of your attention. And this is a conflict for a lot of teachers, because they don't always see that 95% of my time going into 3% of the kids is fear, or makes sense even. How do you budget your attention? To me, the most valuable resource of a teacher is their attention. And if they know how to spend it, they'll be much better off. But it gets so overwhelming. I remember having a teacher in my office. This teacher was super dedicated. He didn't have a car. He lived in Brooklyn, didn't have a car. He would get up like at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning to get a ride to his school. And he came to my office one night. It must have been 10 o'clock at night. And I was working with one of his students, and I was, showing him how to do the behavior, all very basic stuff. And he looks at me and he says, this is great, but you know what the problem is? I have 15 boys in my class, and 11 of them need this. And I can't do this for more than 1 or 2. It's just too time consuming. So I finally partnered up with my uncle, who was a software developer for many years. And we decided we're going to make a really simple way for teachers to be able to keep track of who they need, who needs positive feedback and what's going on. And we're going to make it really simple. And the purpose here is really to build relationships between the teachers and students, because it's that relationship that gives you the ability to push kids to work hard. When they know that you believe in them, they give you so much more than, you know, any other way, really. So we'll jump into a screen share. I'll do a really, really quick demo here. Hang on a second. Okay, now here is a demo class of ClasStars. Now this app, it took us a long time to put this together, because when we started, my partner was only a Windows developer. He had been working in software development for 25 years at that time, and he was only developing software for Windows. So our idea was we were going to make a proof of concept and then get, you know, investors involved and get some bigger company involved. But lo and behold, we did it all ourselves. And now it's available for iPad, it's available on Google Play for Android, but you need a tablet. It's not going to work on a phone, because as you see, there's a lot going on here, and you just need a screen that's big enough. So there are two main parts. Number one is the data input part, which is super simple. I'll show you that in a minute. And then number two is what you see in real time. It's really three parts. What you see in real time, the feedback that the app gives you while you're in class that helps you budget your attention. And then what you can see after class, and, you know, to go back and to really delve deep, do a deep dive into how students are doing. So this is the dashboard, and everything is meant to use, you know, with your finger. It's much more intuitive with your finger, but I'm going to use the arrow just for, you know, the purposes of what we're demonstrating here. So here's the demo class. And if you'd have more than one class, they'd be listed, you know, beneath that. You set up your classes by tapping here, and you add your students and your classes and all that over there. So to start a class, you press this button, and you can title your class if you want to give your class a name. So we can say, you know, how about we'll call it this, SEL From a Distance, right? So that's the name of the class. We'll start the session. And the first thing that we do is take attendance. Now I realize that there are a lot of schools that are using other systems for taking attendance. We're working on integrating that with the other systems, but for now, everyone is assumed to be here, and you can set this up however you want. This is a customizable seating chart, so you can add rows and columns, and if they sit in groups, however your class is set up, you can set this up too. Anyone that's absent, you just tap on their picture, and their picture fades away, and they get that little A. So we'll make a couple of kids absent here. If they come in while you're taking attendance and you want to mark them late, you could just tap a second time and it toggles to late, and a third time toggles it to just present. So we'll mark 2 kids absent and 1 kid late. When you're done, you tap end attendance here, and now you have the option to check homework or to go to class or to stay in attendance mode, but we'll just go to class. So now you're in class mode, and the first question that everybody asks is, what if one of these 2 absent kids just walked in? So very simply, you double tap on the kid that walks in. You get this pop-up, and I can either mark them late or not absent. So if I made a mistake, I would mark them not absent. If they came in late, I tap mark them late, and now they have this late thing, this late icon over here. Now, whatever you do here is time-stamped, because it's so important to look at trends of attendance, trends of lateness. I'll never forget the story that I was walking down the hallway, and a teacher approached me, and I was working with one of her students, and I asked her, how is this, so-and-so doing? She said, he comes 20 minutes late every day. And I said, that's amazing, because last year he came 2 hours late every day. And there was no record of this. There was no way of knowing this. And really the way you look for improvement, it's going to be gradual improvement. That's just the way it goes. So you need to be able to measure how late people are coming. And this does that for you automatically. And this little late thing is going to be here until you engage the child in one of the different ways that we record classroom engagement. And there are basically 4 different directions that you can swipe a child in. The most important one is the up swipe. That's for positive feedback. Now, this is not a point system. Okay, points need to be earned. Positive feedback is an entitlement. Every kid deserves to have positive feedback every day. And when you swipe up on a kid, that indicates that you gave that particular child positive feedback. And there's a 2-day positive feedback meter on the left side of each child. So for example, Jess here has 1 notch in his positive feedback. When I swipe up on him, it goes up to 2. and it goes up to 7. Once you're at 7, that's pretty good. And, clearly that kid has gotten a lot of positive feedback. But you're right, your goal here is really to look around the room and see who has gotten the least positive feedback in the last 2 days and prioritize those kids. Now, once you're comfortable with the single swipe, there's a button here at the bottom, and you can customize to have single swipe on different modes. But if you tap here, these circles will fill up, and now you're on full function mode. So now let's say I go to Stevie, because he's gotten very little positive feedback in the last 2 days, and I swipe up on him, and now I get the positive feedback menu. So I can either tell him that he put forth a good effort, maybe I just give him encouragement, which is not, in response to anything, I'm just encouraging him, totally in my control. Maybe he demonstrated good self-control, maybe he did an act of kindness, or maybe he did a good decision. So it's much more specific feedback. I have a record of much more specific feedback. If he made a good decision, I can record that, and then I can also rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 how good it was. So I can actually measure by just a swipe, a tap, and a tap. I get the time, I get the, all the information on what's happening really in a fraction of a second. And, giving positive feedback is obviously very, very important, but like you had mentioned earlier, identifying the deficiencies in the skills is going to show when there's misbehavior. So how do we record misbehavior? Again, we have a single swipe for it, where you just swipe down on a kid on single swipe and it records a misbehavior. So let's put it back on single swipe and we'll mark down a misbehavior. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And this is really meant to help teachers get acclimated. Like you said, you don't want to keep giving them more and more things to do, but this is just a super simple way. If somebody is misbehaving, you need to record it, because if you're not going to keep any record of it, you're just not going to know. And, we'll get into this in a second. So on single swipe, you just swipe down, and then you have the option to record the intensity of the misbehavior, because that's also something that you want to see progress. You want to measure progress by, how fast was the turnaround? How disruptive was it? But there's another option here, and you can, activate this or deactivate this in the setting. This is the response toolbar. This is my response to this behavior. Did I give a warning? Did I use the opportunity to, as a teachable moment? Did I minimize the trigger? Because like we discussed earlier, consistency is key. And if you're going to respond consistently, that you're going to get a better response from the child. So if you record that you gave a warning, you know exactly how many times you've given warnings. There's, that tag to the event that I gave a warning, and you can give more than one. I can give a warning and minimize the trigger. So you can have more than one response to a particular behavior. And again, this is for really advanced users. So I typically don't show this right away, but I guess the last demo that I did, I had this activated. I forgot to turn it off. So when you're comfortable with single swipe, you tap here again. And again, you could set it to have single swipe for the up swipe, but full function for the down swipe. You can customize the different modes. Now, when I swipe down on a child, I actually get a wheel of the common misbehaviors in the classroom. So I have disruptive, distracted, not seated, other, which covers everything else, talking, unprepared, or conflict. So if Valentine is disruptive, I would just swipe down on her, tap on disruptive. And again, if she was mildly disruptive, I can give it a 2 rating, and maybe I just redirected her. And just like that, I have a very clear record. Now, when you talk about the relationship between teachers and students, which is obviously, so important, so many times I've spoken with kids that they feel like the teachers don't like them. And there are cases when the teachers don't like them. Obviously, that could happen. But in most cases, the teachers do like them, and they care about them, and they want to try to help them. But the kids get this impression that the teachers don't like them. And where does that come from? So I remembered initially finding out about this reading a Malcolm Gladwell book, Blink. But I actually got to meet the subject of the chapter that Malcolm Gladwell spoke about, who is John Gottman. And he and his wife, Julie, have a center out in Seattle where they've been studying couples for 45 years now. And they can do something really remarkable. They can watch a couple discuss a disagreement for 3 minutes, and with over 90% accuracy predict if they'll still be together in 10 years. How cool is that, huh?
So cool.
And
I would not want to be their participant.
Yeah, I hope they don't see us in the airport traveling.
But what's so cool, huh?
He's stuck with me.
He's stuck with you. I don't feel bad for you guys. You guys look pretty good. So what's so cool about it is that it's so simple what they do. And in a minute, you'll be able to do it too. They just count the number of compliments and criticisms that they give each other. And what they found is that couples in a strong relationship, even when they argue, still give 5 compliments to every criticism. And couples that are not in a strong relationship, that are not going to last, give 0.8 compliments to every criticism. So there's a really wide gap between the ratio of compliments to criticisms depending on the strength of the relationship. And what struck me is, how does that play out to a child in a classroom? The kids that are getting criticized, which a classroom is a critical environment, you're learning, it's going to be critical. How many compliments are these kids that are getting criticized getting to offset the negative effect of the criticism? And I came across a Harvard Business Review study that said that it actually takes 7 compliments to offset the negative effect of a criticism. Now, who's paying attention to this? And who's knowing that today I need to give a certain child more positive feedback because yesterday he had a rough day, right? That is totally not on anybody's radar. Well, it's on our radar, because if you look at the circles around the kids, you'll notice that most of the kids have yellow borders around them. Some have orange. Colin over here has a blue. And the border colors actually indicate the ratio of positive to negative interactions, up swipes to down swipes. So when you start out your year, when you add new students, they have no border color. They're just blank, gray or white, whatever it is. If the first event that you record is a swipe down, they will actually have a red border color. And that means that this child has more down swipes than up swipes. And it's not to penalize the child. It's to remind you to engage that kid in some kind of positive way. Because that's what's happening to these kids. They think that the teachers don't like them because the only attention that they get from the teacher is when they're making mistakes, when they're struggling. So what else should they think? But if you have some way to be reminded to know that these are the kids that need your encouragement and positive feedback, and it stays red until you have more positive than negative. Once you get into the positive, ground, it turns orange, and it stays orange until you get to a 3-to-1 ratio. And at a 3-to-1 ratio, it turns yellow. And those are the kids that are yellow. You see them, they're at least at 3-to-1, and it stays yellow until they get to 5-to-1. At 5-to-1, it turns blue. That's the Gottman magic number. And then at 7-to-1, it turns green. That's the Harvard Business Review magic number. So you actually have 2 criteria of budgeting your attention towards kids that need your encouragement. Everybody deserves every day. That goes without question. Nobody should go without encouragement. But there are some kids that are going to need it more, and those are the kids that are struggling. And this will show this to you at a much, much earlier stage than when you're waiting for the really bad disruption. And I remember when I first started testing this out with teachers, one teacher came to me and said, "Why do you want me to record every single misbehavior? Doesn't a kid deserve that sometimes I should turn a blind eye?" And I said, it depends what your motivation in recording the misbehaviors are. If your motivation is to punish the kid, then absolutely. But if your motivation is you want to see how the kids are struggling, because, like you said, they're not giving you a hard time. I think you had this post, Jess. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. So every misbehavior is an indication of a kid having a hard time. Don't you want to know how hard of a time these kids are having? So you want to record as much misbehavior as possible if that is your baseline and determining factor of how much positive feedback you're going to give these kids and how you're going to prioritize them. If you're going to ignore that, you're not being fair to this kid. So that's, the up swipe and the down swipe. It's really simple. It's the most efficient way to record events that are happening. And again, different teachers are going to have different ways. Some are going to record more, some are going to record less. But if you're consistent, you're going to see which kids need your attention the most at a much earlier stage before you have the massive disruptions or the, terrible failing scores. So those are the first 2 functions that we provide. And that's the immediate, real-time feedback that we give you when you're using ClasStars. The other 2 functions are the right and left functions. And one of them is attendance, like I had mentioned earlier. Attendance is so important. If you're not there, you're not, it's over. The game is over. But so many kids come to school and are present when we take attendance, and then they go to the nurse or to the bathroom or wherever, and they miss significant class time. 10% of absence is considered chronic absence. That's when it's already starting to impact academic performance. But wouldn't that also mean that if I miss 10% of the class time because I was out at the bathroom or with the nurse or whatever reason, wouldn't that be the same? Yet, are we keeping track of how much time people are spending outside of the classroom? It's very hard to do it, but we do it. And again, we have a single swipe for this as well, but you already understand what single swipe does. So we'll get straight into the full function mode. When a child leaves the room, you swipe them to the right, and that activates our real-time attendance wheel. And I can, again, set this on single swipe alone, where it just marks them out and doesn't tell me where they went, but I can actually record why they left. Maybe they went out for a quick 5-minute break. Maybe they were excused for the rest of the day. Maybe they went out for a medical reason to the nurse. Maybe I missed them when I took attendance and they're really absent. Maybe they went out to the restroom. Maybe they were out for services, for discipline. So if, let's say, somebody goes out to the restroom, I tap on that, their picture will fade and they have the little restroom icon. And now I can't swipe on them. If I try swiping up or down on them, it's not going to work because they're not here. So I can't be interacting with them. And it's timestamped. So I can actually come at any time, tap one time on the child and get this little menu pop up that tells me how long ago they've left. Very, very clear, very precise. And that's going to stay until they come back. When they come back, I double tap. And now I have a record. They came back less than a minute ago. They just came back and was out for less than 1 minute. And I'll never forget a high school teacher who tells me the first day that she was using this, a kid had gone out to the bathroom for 9 minutes. And when he came back, she said, you've been out for 9 minutes. And he said, what are you talking about? I was only out for 2. And she said, no, I have it recorded right here. You were out for 9 minutes. She said, from that day on, the entire classroom understood that there was accountability. They were back much, much sooner. So the real-time attendance is such an important piece that I just don't see getting enough attention. So we're trying to bring that attention here. And finally, the last piece is the academic piece. And that is when you're actually engaging them academically. So when you ask them a question, you swipe them to the left. And for that, there's no single swipe, because here the options are advanced or basic. You want to know if you talk about mastery. Are they mastering the material, or do they just show regular competency? 2 levels of correct answers. Then there's the on track, which is not correct, but it's in the ballpark. There's incorrect, and then we always give other. That's always, in case we miss something. So if, let's say, they answered it, really, really well, so you tap advanced, and that will record in the 2-day meter as a yellow. So I can actually distinguish between the last 2 days, which kids have gotten my positive feedback in a general sense, or academic positive feedback, because academic positive feedback is even more powerful than just saying, wow, you did a really great thing. Because after all, school is a center of academia. It's a place of learning. So you can distinguish between which kids have gotten what kind of positive feedback, because your goal is really to give them the positive academic feedback. That's a much more effective, they're doing well academically too, when they have a lot of yellow. The problem is that that's not always in our control, that the kids need to be able to respond to that. And when you have more than, let's say you have more than one class and you have the same kids that you're teaching 2 different subjects to, kids will tend to be more engaged in the subjects where they're strong and retreat in the subjects where they're weak. And that's really hard for teachers to keep track with who they've engaged in social studies. So, you might think, I engaged this kid already, but it was a different subject, and that's a subject where they're strong, so they're more likely to engage. When you have the version of ClasStars that allows you to set up more than one class, all the yellow and green here turns blue when you go to the next class. So the yellow and green means that I've engaged in this particular class. So I would prioritize a kid that has no positive feedback in the last 2 days over a kid that's had positive feedback in another class. But I would also prioritize a kid that hasn't had positive feedback in the current class over another kid that has had positive feedback in the current class, even if it's the same amount of positive feedback overall in the last 2 days. So in the classroom, we're giving teachers in a color-coded way, in a very simple way. We try to keep the screen as simple and clean as possible. Very little text. The only text that we have here really is the name of the kids. That's it. Otherwise, it's just border colors and meter colors. That's it. When you're done, you tap end the class, close the session, and now we come to the dashboards. And we'll get a little bit into the dashboards to see what we're going to do. And I'll see if I can pull up one of charts over one of the reports that we have. I'm not getting the reports here, but we have a lot of dashboards here. The basic dashboard is the overview dashboard, and this we can make it big. We don't need to see the classes here. Okay, here you have every kid. You have the border color, and the 2-day meter will always show on every kid because that's really with the teacher. That's a personal, that's more personal than academic. The snapshot dashboard tells you, between these dates, how they're doing academically, behavior, and in attendance. So let's select the date range. We'll select all the dates, all the sessions. You could pick a start and end date, or you can select all the sessions, and it works as a traffic light. So if they're doing well, it'll be green. If they're doing poorly, it'll be red. And if they're in between, if they're starting to slack off, it'll be yellow. So you have that, you could see that different kids. And this is all random data. This is all fake data. And this really allows you every day to look at your class and see everyone should be green in everything. And it helps you identify the kids that are starting to slip or the kids that are struggling, and it gives you a reminder of them on a daily basis. Because if you're not looking at your roster and seeing who do I need to focus on today, you're not going to focus on them. It needs to be intentional. So this allows you to do that. Now, let's say you see a kid that's struggling with behavior. So you tap on the behavior button here, and this allows you to drill down. Again, you get to look at the entire class, and you get bar charts of the green are the swipe ups, the yellow are the academic positives, the red is the swipe downs, and here you'll see in orange, that's incorrect. So we put all the positives on the left and all the negatives on the right. And if you tap on the bar chart, you get a little pop out that gives you the counts. Swipe ups, swipe downs, correct academic, incorrect academic. So you can really very quickly look at whoever you need to look at and get real, clear, specific data. You can also drill down to the kids. We'll get to that in a minute. In attendance, you could do the same thing. You tap on the attendance button, and you get a little pie chart next to every kid that tells you, again, the green is the times present, the red is the absence, yellow is coming late, and blue is leaving in the middle of class. And if you tap on the chart, you get both the counts for all of these things, overall classes, how many of those present, how many times absent, how many times late, how many times leaving the class, and the time that it adds up to. Because you could leave the class many times and it could add up to not a lot of time, or you can leave not that many times, but it does add up to a lot of times. So we give you both, so you can actually see how much class time is being missed on each and every kid. We do the same thing for homework, and then we have a details page that is way too detailed. We're not gonna have time to get into that today, but if you download the app and you play around with it, you can see it. Every download that you do gives you this demo class, so you can play and see how the data, again, is random data, but you can see how that plays out. When you dive in, when you tap on these 3 buttons, you get more. You're now diving into a particular student, and we have individual dashboards for academic, for behavior and academic goes together, and then for attendance and for homework. So let's take a look at the attendance dashboard. So here you have the timeline starting at September 9th all the way to October 21st. I'm gonna shorten this timeline a little bit so that we're just looking at at a smaller sample of time. So we're gonna go back to October 10th. So that's gonna filter out, and we're gonna only look at October 10th. Here on the left, I have a list of every single attendance event. Medical attention on October 9th at 10:03, missed 8 minutes. Absent on October 8th, present on October 7th, present on October 6th. Scroll down and see every single thing. If someone was absent, you can mark them excused if they have a good excuse, and that's obviously different. Here you have the same kind of donut chart that's going to show you everything, and if you tap on it, you'll get a pop-up that will give you, the legend for the chart. And this top one, you cannot filter. This gives you all the records that you have for this child. And if you tap on one of the items in the legend, it's going to pop it out in the chart so you can get a little bit more clarity on that. Late for class excused 1 time, that's represented over here. Here you have the filtered record. So when I start playing around with the dates, or if I want to filter out certain events by tapping here, I can look at if I want to see all the latenesses or all the absence or all the times they went, for an errand or whatever it is. I can filter that out over there. That's all going to show up here at the bottom in this bottom donut chart. And this way you can compare it to the overall. But the real magic is when I slide out this little chart over here, and this gives me a timeline of the day, of when the student was present and when they left. So I can see here the dark green lines means that they were there all day. The light greens means that they were present, but this was a class that they were not present from beginning till end. And here you see somebody left class. Here you see, here, and not somebody, it's Jess. We're talking specifically to this kid. Here, he left here, came back, and then left again. Here he was late. So you can actually see across a timeline. And the idea here is to look for trends. Are kids having a hard time in the beginning of the class, at the end of the class, in the middle of the class? Is there a trend here to look at? And this timeline chart of attendance gives you really, really cool data. When you go at behaviors, it's a similar idea, slightly different charts. Again, the timeline is at the top and the list of events are here and the filter bar is right here. But now, and we also have the same kind of, I got to just adjust the dates here to make it make sense, because when you're dealing with random data and then you do a demo outside of the times of the random data, it skews the chart. So here you get plotted out every single event when it happened. Here it's starting at 10, going till 10:30, starting from the beginning of September through the beginning of October. That's what we're looking at here in the timeline. And every bubble represents an event. If I tap on a bubble, it will actually take me to that in the list. So here it highlights self-control. That's this bubble that I just tapped. The bigger bubbles are when you rate it higher. You know, when you give it the 5-point rating, that's going to give you the bigger bubble. And the smaller bubbles are obviously smaller. So you have here an incredible story of progress. It's not just a snapshot. It's actually a story of what's going on across time. You can look at different times, different dates, see when are kids acting out, how are kids responding to the positive feedback and encouragement. Is it, you know, if you have a kid that's acting out, they'll have a lot of red dots, and then you'll hopefully, if the intervention is working, you'll see them, you know, gradually get less and less. So these are the charts that we have, you know, in a nutshell. I know we're very, very short on time. You know, I would love to get more, you know, I'd love to have more time to get your feedback on this, of how, you know, this plays into the work that you're doing, how you see your teachers using this. Go ahead.
Well, a few things. First of all, you know, I love this app, and we 100% endorse it and support this app and encourage all educators to download this app, because it's going to give you that intentional, timely information. Where I see this fitting is actually in both of our newest books and work. In the first one, Behavior Solutions, because you need data and multiple types of data points to make decisions about your classroom, about your grade level, about your school, department, whatever that may be. If you're a behavior team, you could also look at this school-wide. I mean, if you're working just in your teacher teams, I mean, this is brilliant because it's giving you multiple data points to actually make these decisions. And in both books, there's actual interventions, remediations, prevention ideas that you're to be implementing based on what your data is telling you, whether it's self-control, whether it's engagement, whether it's a lack of, you know, how much positive reinforcement we're giving. So then you could use those books to actually go in and see, okay, here's what I could do about it. Both Behavior Solutions and Social Emotional Learning from a distance, you at a distance, you could actually take those interventions and ideas, implement them, and then come back and look at your data points again, whether it's every 2 weeks, whether it's every month, collectively as you're making these decisions. Of course, daily, but I'm already thinking systemically.
Daily, yes.
How would I use this if I had it at my school? So those are a couple of things that I thought about as I was processing the information you were sharing.
Yeah, I think the data visualization is so key because it just it really simplifies, instead of looking at, like, you know, statistics and numbers and percentages and things like that, that if I see a lot of large red dots at 9 a.m. every day, that means that the student's having a significant episode, that then I can say, well, gosh, 9 a.m. is when we do our writing block. Maybe the student hates to write, you know, and we could then provide some tools, some interventions to support the student instead of using punishment. You know, oh, there's another outburst, remove them from my class. I also like the, I guess I'd call it like a heat map, as far as like with my whole classroom, where now I can see by color you know, those that are struggling the most. And it's a lot less stressful monitoring my own positive to negative ratios rather than my principal coming into my classroom saying, here's what your percentages are, or the
Yes.
ratio. But
Yes.
to just to build another layer of awareness within my own class, that I can say, you know, the students that struggle the most need the highest ratio. But I
Yes.
also want to point out too that it's not just positive praise, because sometimes if we just praise students for everything, sometimes it can be patronizing to a
Right.
student, that they think that, hey, thanks for being here, swipe up, that was a positive. It's like, no, because that almost communicates to that student that I have such low expectations for you that I'm just going to praise you for every little thing. That sometimes it's those nonverbals, the fist bump,
Yes.
those are those things that make those connections that still could be a swipe up, but that we're not just swiping up for every little thing that counts as, quote, what we deem as a positive.
And an idea I wanted to share, and I know we have to wrap up for today, but an idea that I was thinking about is, at my site, we started off this 4 positive to every negative challenge. So
Right.
we had this 4 to 1 challenge, and I love even 5 to 1 more and 7 to 1 more, but just to get people to start thinking about it. So we literally just posted 4 to 1 challenge, 4 to 1, and
Awesome.
it was our school-wide goal. So this is such a fun way. If you did like a 5 to 1 challenge and just reminded everyone the importance and the power of that positive reinforcement,
Yes.
then you could also look school-wide at, you know, how are we doing within our classrooms? Or if you just have a challenge for yourself in a classroom, you can't control the school, then you could do a fun challenge in that way too, and then celebrate when you've met those challenges, because that takes practice to get yourself to really give the positives to every negative. Because as humans, we tend to go to the negative first. Is, I don't know if it's a protection or a defense mechanism, but that's what we're kind of wired to go to first. So we have to stop a minute and practice giving those positives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good stuff.
Well, yeah, as always, a pleasure. Always a pleasure. You know, happy to jump on and do this again whenever you guys have some time. So looking forward to that, and we'll get this up there really quickly. If you know anybody that wants to use this, we're up and running. We're up and running, ready to go. Right now, it's completely free. You can only sign up for 1 class. Hopefully within the next week or 2, you'll be able to add classes. And we're doing a very, very low subscription model. Literally like $2.99 a month, you know, $2.99 to $9.99 a month per teacher, you know, per user. That's how we're starting out. We just want to get in there and let people see how powerful this can be, and, you know, take it from there. So anybody that you know that would benefit from this, which I think every teacher would benefit from this, you know, this was you talk about a call to arms. This was, you know, I've been running with this for 7 years without stopping, without taking any breaks. So, you know, we're excited to finally get it out there.
Very cool.
Well, thank you so much for doing it, and we'll help in any way.
Thanks. Take care. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.